Welcome to eFlux Effects Tutorials. Today's tutorial is going to be on blending materials and how to make natural transitions between materials, and particularly I'm focusing on ground planes, but of course this can be used for any two materials that you're combining where you don't want a sharp line between the materials, where you want it to flow and look a little more natural. And this is going to add a lot of realism to your scenes if you use this approach. You can see everything's seamless, and it looks like it flows, and you can follow the rocks along, and everything looks, all the rocks are whole, and it gives that real kind of a real look to it. And this is what we started with. When I brought the materials in, I brought a cobblestone material and a sand material in. You can see there's a sharp line. It's very easy to see the line where the transition is. If we zoom in here, you'll see some of the cobblestones and the stone are cut in half. It doesn't look real, and there's different ways we put buildings on it, or we don't zoom in and we kind of ignore that. But again, this is if you have Photoshop or similar photo editing software, this is actually a very easy technique. And again, I believe it's worth the time, and especially if you're wanting to do close-ups. And so if we come here, actually that's the here. It's better. Let's turn this one off. Let's turn one of these sands off just to show you something. And what you can see here is basically what we're going to be doing is we're going to be masking out some of the stone, and we're replacing it and with the sand texture into that. So we're making essentially we're making a custom texture. Let's go ahead and delete all these, and we'll get started. All right, so I used textures from the Rome pack. So if I come over here, I want to bring in one of the ground textures. It's a kind of like a cobblestone ground texture. If you we'll go ahead and duplicate that. If you hold down the control key and drag, here we go, and again, if you hit Control M, the textures will actually link together. Then I have another tutorial on another way of expanding textures, but for this one, for this particular tutorial, this is a more preferred method. So now I'm going to drag the texture down, and I'm going to change this second texture to sand. So I'm going to come over here, and I'm going to stop talking here for a second while this. All right, here we go. Slide down, find the. Here we go. Bring the gravel, and just by dragging on top of the texture, we'll replace all the materials with the gravel texture, normals, bumps, everything. Brings it all in. And hit D, slide it over. All right, so again, now you can see we have the two textures. They're kind of aligned. How you'll see it on a lot of folks' videos, and again, it's that hard line, and again, I don't think that's natural looking, and in some instances it's fine, but again, I was actually working on this with close-up. So what am I going to do? I select the texture. I'll go ahead and select my diffuse layer. Of course, materials are the checkerboard. Make sure the cobblestone's selected. And we're going to go ahead and launch, and in this case, if you see the middle icon, will launch your preferred editing software. I have mine linked to Photoshop, and it'll bring up the texture in Photoshop. Unlink it. I like to name it. I don't want to keep it locked because I'm going to edit this layer. So I'm going to name it Diffuse. Once I select the layer, come down here, and I always want to work with masks. So I'm going to add a mask. I don't want to actually make any edits directly to the texture itself. This way, if I make a mistake, they're easy to correct. So create a mask. I select the mask. Zoom in, just hit Control. Good enough. And make sure everything's selected. I'll select a brush. In this case, I want a hard brush. If I wanted them to fade into each other, I could select a softer brush. or change the opacity or the flow rates, but in this case I want a nice hard brush. Make sure your colors are black and white. And what you'll see here is if the brush is black, it erases, and if the brush is white, it will add back in. And so now I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to just start removing some of the cobblestone. You can, depending on what you're blending, will depend on how accurate this needs to be. For doing the stone, this doesn't have to be super accurate because the colors are close between the sand and the cobblestones. But I'm going to just spend a little time trying to make sure there's no sharp edges, and just kind of erase. And again, you could zoom in and feather some of this if this was like, highly contrasting colors, which again they're not. And what you can see what I'm doing is I'm cutting around. I'm gonna cut more of this out so it's more obvious what I'm doing. And I can use the brackets to make the size of the brush larger or smaller, depending on where I'm trying to get. And we'll take a couple of minutes to do this. The good thing is we only do this on this layer, and once we create the mask, we're going to use the same mask for every other layer going forward. And go over some things while I'm doing this. What we'll do is, like I said, we'll cut these out, and then we're going to take the actual sand layer and we're going to put it underneath it, so you'll see wherever I'm erasing the stone, you'll see the sand underneath. Then I'll bring in the bump, the ambient occlusion, the displacement, and the roughness maps, and I'll do the exact same thing. I'll take the mask, I'll copy the mask to those layers, and then with the from the sand, like I'll have the bump map from the sand on the bottom. So again, I don't have to do anything with that. And then on the top of it, I'll have the bump layer from the cobblestone, but the bump layer will have the mask applied, the same mask applied to it. So here we go. Second. This tutorial takes a little longer, not because it's only a couple of minutes to cover this, to be honest with you, but unfortunately it just takes a little bit of time to and hit the brackets can make that time. It just takes a little bit of time to actually do the work, and it's a little slower because I'm trying to talk while I'm doing this, and you can neaten this up. Just look for any areas that might look better. I'm actually using these textures in an upcoming short film I'm working on, so I want to look halfway decent because I'm actually going to use these later today. There we go. So those are the edits I wanted to make to the texture. So a little trick I'll show you before I go out, or I'll tell you about, is if I wanted this to just end here and I didn't want to merge another texture, as long as you save it as a PNG, it'll show what's underneath it when you bring it into IClone. So, all right, so that's, yeah, I like that. That's the texture that I want to use. So now I'm going to go out to IClone, and I'm going to go to the sand texture. So I just double click on it, make sure I'm clicked on the base color, which is the diffuse layer. Apply it. Oops, I want to change the name, but I have to unlock the layer to do that. So now I'll just lay it layered sand. And then if I drag it, and I drag it over to the other comp, and then if I hold shift, it'll center everything, it'll line it up. So make sure you hold shift. And there you go. So if I drag the sand below it, you can see that everything merges. And it's just that simple. One mask, and and that's my new diffuse layer. So one of the things I always try and do before I do anything else is I go ahead and test. So there's a couple of different ways you can, the easiest way to export, and I always work with PNGs. This way if there's any transparency, I don't have to worry about it. Quick export to PNG. Let me go to the file where I have this saved. I create a new one. I actually created a lot of these textures earlier. There we go, and I'll just name it Diffuse 2. Alright, so now let's drag that into IClone and see what it looks like before we do anything else. Alright, so select the cobblestone and then select the base color, and then I'm going to drag that layer, that texture we just created. I'm going to drag it, and then in this case I'm going to go with you can go with a unique texture which will only do that particular material on that particular item, or a link texture which will actually change all the textures for all the cobblestones. And so in this case I'll go with linked. So the first thing, again, I want to point out, like I did before, is you can see how everything looks smooth, but you're still going to be able to see the seam, and that's because the bump and the ambient occlusion and the displacement maps won't line up with the sand texture. So that's why it's very important that you do all the layers. And so what we're going to do here is we're now going to export all of these layers into Photoshop. And then we're going to make custom bump maps, ambient occlusion, roughness, and displacement. You don't need to do metallic or opacity because they're solid colors. Select it. That'll bring it in. Sorry this takes so long, but it, like I said, it's very repetitive, and I get that. But I want to make sure everything's clear. So just for neatness, let's close that. We don't need that since we've already moved the layer over. So with everyone, we have to unlock it, rename it. And then we drag it over. Again, you hold it on top. You hit the shift key and drag it in, and it'll center it. And I'll close that. I don't need it. And we'll just work our way down. Same process for each one. So one of the things also, like there are terrains and different things that we use in IClone, and sometimes I'll be laying a material on top of a terrain, but I still have the same issue. I don't always want those lines to be sharp. So I can come in here and use the same technique, but what I'll do is instead of using the sand layer, I just let it be transparent, and then what you'll see is the cobblestone will end, and it'll show up over top of whatever terrain you've laid it on top of. And for the sake of time, I won't show you that because it's the exact same process, and it actually works really well. And I use it a lot, and again, it just, the hope is that it makes things a little more natural. Things flow a little better, and when you get in those close-ups, it doesn't bring your eye to what you don't want, which is the terrain. You just want the terrain to be there, the ground plane to be there, right? You want to focus on the characters or whatever you're animating. So let's line up everything here up. I'm big on housekeeping. It keeps me from making mistakes. So let me drag everything in order here. There we go. So now we've got all the different layers. They're all dragged in. So what we'll do is you'll see I selected everything, and I just created a folder just to keep everything together and neat. So all the cobblestone will be in one folder, and basically just select all the different layers and then select the folder icon and everything go in there. Then I'll hold the Alt key and I just drag the mask down to each layer. There we go. And it makes everything line up. There we go. So now the sand layer, we're not done yet, obviously. So that's why you're seeing the sand pop through. Now we're going to do the exact same thing for sand. You know, to be honest, you can see what we're doing here. So if you can skip some of this, skip forward, because this is going to be the exact same same process we did on for the cobblestone. Sometimes the hardest thing is to talk while I'm doing all this and keep things moving quickly. And repetitive tasks can always be a little bit of a pain. Let me fix that. Sorry, I like everything spelled correctly. So let's start with the, we've already made that one. So what we'll do is we'll start with the bump map. So we just turn those on. And just to show, I mean, you can see, I mean, nothing underneath it affects it. So now let's just export all of these. You can do save as, PNG, save it. Again, the quick export. One of the nice things on Photoshop is the quick export remembers where the last place save location was. Where save as goes to a default and you basically have to start over with the path every time. And let's work our way down. Ambient occlusion. I was trying to find an easy way to do this in like a 5-minute tutorial, and unfortunately there's just a bunch of layers, and it just, what ended up happening is I was speeding things up and leaving things out, and I was concerned that it wouldn't it would leave maybe an open question, and then I did you a disservice, you know, for spending your time. So again, I apologize for this one taking quite this long. If you're still hanging in there, one of the things, like I said, is you can always skip around on some of these tutorials. When you see like an action that's got to go, in this case, you know, we're doing the same action for 5 different layers. Let's go back into IClone. All right. So now, if you watch those seams, you'll see that all that stuff. We've already got the diffuse actually. I'm pulling these from off screen, and you can just drag them over whatever layer. Again, it's a normal map. It's not grayscale. Pretty obvious. If it was a grayscale, it'd be gray. Link texture, so it'll catch both. And I think kind of went over before with the unique, and you'll notice it still doesn't clean up the seam, and that's because of the displacement map. So, but again, it's good practice to bring them all in this way. If again, on some textures it may matter more than others, but if you make all the different textures, and this way if you use them later for a different application, you have everything. And now watch when we bring in the displacement. It is a height map. It is linked, and boom, You saw the seams. If you looked at where they're going, they disappeared. And there you go. So that's all it took. I really appreciate your time, and hopefully you found this helpful. And if you have any questions or comments, please feel free to leave them. Like and subscribe, and try and come up with some more video tutorial ideas for you. Thank you.